Sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is bet everything on nothing at all. When life strips away your dignity, your home, and your hope, you learn that 50 cents can buy more than a broken-down cabin. It can buy a second chance. Mira Lane knew that feeling well when she stood at that auction, holding her son's hand and bidding on a place nobody else wanted. The cabin was falling apart, miles from anywhere, with no electricity or running water. Most folks called her crazy for taking it on. But Mira and her 12-year-old boy Levi rolled up their sleeves and got to work. They patched holes, cleared brush, and turned that old wreck into something that felt like home. Then one day, while exploring the back room, Levi found something hidden under the floorboards that would change everything. What would you do if your desperate gamble suddenly made your family rich beyond your wildest dreams? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning after the auction, Mira Lane sat on the sagging front steps of what was now her home, watching the sun filter through the towering pines that surrounded their 50-cent sanctuary. The coffee in her chipped ceramic mug had gone cold an hour ago, but she held on to it anyway, finding comfort in the familiar weight against her palms. Levi was still asleep inside. Curled up in his sleeping bag on the floor, they'd swept clean of decades of debris and mouse droppings. 3 months ago, she'd been Mira Patterson, married to a man who promised her the world and delivered bankruptcy instead. The divorce papers still carried that name, along with the foreclosure notice that had stripped away everything she'd thought was permanent. The house in the suburbs with its manicured lawn and mortgage payments. The minivan that got repossessed on a Tuesday morning while she was dropping Levi at school. The credit cards that had sustained them through David's failed business ventures until they couldn't sustain anything at all. She pulled out her worn leather journal, its pages filled with careful lists and calculations that had become her lifeline. Every expense tracked, every dollar stretched until it screamed. The journal had been a birthday gift from Levi 2 years ago, back when birthdays meant cake and presents instead of another day closer to losing everything. Now it held the blueprint of their survival. Water situation, she wrote in her careful script. Spring about 200 yards downhill. Clear and cold. Need to test for safety. She'd been a chemistry teacher before the divorce, before David's debts became her debts and her career became a casualty of starting over. The knowledge served her now in ways she'd never imagined. Understanding what made water safe to drink, how to test soil for a garden, the chemistry of preserving food without refrigeration. The cabin itself was a testament to stubborn survival. Built sometime in the 1960s by someone who clearly knew mountain living, it sat on a foundation of fieldstone and hope. The roof leaked in 3 places she'd counted so far, but the bones of the structure were solid. Hand-hewn beams supported a frame that had weathered 40 years of mountain winters. The windows were mostly intact, though several panes would need replacing before the snow came. Inside, the main room served as kitchen, living room, and everything in between. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its chimney cracked but serviceable. The back room, where Levi had chosen to sleep, was smaller, with built-in shelves and a window that looked out toward the ridge. There was no bathroom to speak of, just an outhouse that leaned at a precarious angle about 30 yards behind the cabin. Priorities, Mira continued writing. Roof repairs, window sealing, firewood collection, food preservation setup. She'd learned to think in terms of winter survival, even though it was only August. Mountain living demanded that kind of forward thinking. Levi emerged from the cabin, his dark hair sticking up at impossible angles, still wearing yesterday's clothes. At 12, he carried himself with a seriousness that broke her heart and made her proud in equal measure. He'd stopped asking when they could go back to their real house sometime in July. This was their real house now. Morning. Mom. He settled beside her on the steps, automatically reaching for the second cup of coffee she'd poured from habit. She'd diluted it heavily with powdered milk. Caffeine wasn't something a 12-year-old needed, but the ritual of sharing morning coffee had become important to both of them. Sleep better last night. The sleeping bags were a temporary solution. They'd need real beds before long, but furniture required money they were carefully rationing. Yeah, it's quiet here. He meant it as a good thing. Their last apartment, a month-to-month rental in a part of town that made her nervous, had been all sirens and shouting neighbors. Here the loudest sounds came from wind in the pines and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Different kind of quiet than we're used to. Levi nodded, sipping his diluted coffee. I like it. It feels like we can think here. That was exactly what Mira had hoped for. Space to think, to plan, to rebuild, without the constant pressure of rent increases and disapproving neighbors. The isolation that had made the cabin worthless to everyone else made it priceless to them. What's the plan for today? Levi asked. He'd become her partner in this venture, understanding that their survival depended on both of them contributing whatever they could. Roof first. Those leaks will turn into real problems once the weather changes. She stood, brushing pine needles from her jeans. You up for handing me shingles? Always. They worked through the morning with the kind of comfortable efficiency that had developed over their weeks of rebuilding. Mira had taught herself basic construction through library books and YouTube videos back when they still had internet access. Levi had proven surprisingly handy with tools, his small hands useful for reaching places she couldn't manage. From the roof, she could see for miles across the valley. Other cabins dotted the landscape, most of them seasonal hunting camps or weekend retreats. Their closest neighbor was nearly a mile away. The isolation was both blessing and burden, no one to judge their unconventional choices, but also no one to rely on in an emergency. Mom, look at this. Levi's voice came from inside the cabin. She climbed down from the roof to find him examining the back room with new interest. These shelves are weird. The built-in shelving did seem oddly proportioned, too deep for books, too narrow for storage containers. The wood was the same age as the rest of the cabin, but showed signs of more recent modification. Whoever built this place was particular about their storage, Mira agreed, running her hand along the smooth wood. The craftsmanship was excellent, with joints that had held tight through decades of settling and seasonal changes. And look at this. Levi knelt beside the window, pointing to scratches in the wooden sill. These looked like they might be letters or something. Mira crouched beside him, squinting at the marks. They did look intentional, though age and weather had worn them nearly smooth. Could be initials. People like to leave their mark. S.R. Levi traced the faint letters with his finger. Samuel something. Could be. She made a mental note to add the mysterious S.R. to her journal. Every detail about their new home felt significant, as if understanding its history would help them write their own future here. That evening, they sat by the fireplace, sharing a dinner of canned soup and crackers. The fire was more for comfort than warmth, but the dancing flames made the cabin feel like home in a way that electric lights never had. Levi had found an old deck of cards in one of the kitchen drawers, and they played hand after hand of gin rummy while the sun set behind the mountains. Do you think we'll really make it here? Levi asked during a lull in the game. The question came out casually, but Mira heard the real concern underneath. I think we're already making it, she said, laying down her cards. We've got shelter, water, each other. The rest we can figure out as we go, but what about school? And money? Homeschooling is legal in Montana. I can teach you better than any public school. That part was true. The money situation was more complicated, and there are ways to make a living up here. People need things fixed, gardens tended, firewood cut. We'll find our niche. Levi nodded, accepting her confidence even if he sensed the uncertainty underneath. He'd grown up fast in the past year, learning to trust her judgment even when the path ahead seemed unclear. Later, after Levi had settled into his sleeping bag, Mira sat by the dying fire and wrote in her journal. Day 12. Roof repairs complete on north side. Water source confirmed safe. Levi adapting well. Found initials SR carved in back room windowsill. Previous owner perhaps. Need to research property history. She closed the journal and stared into the glowing coals. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had warmth and safety. For a woman who'd lost everything 6 months ago, that felt like everything she needed. 3 weeks into their mountain life, Mira had established routines that made their unconventional existence feel almost normal. She woke with the sun, made coffee over the camp stove while Levi slept, and spent the quiet morning hours planning their day in her leather journal. Today's list included patching the last section of roof and starting work on reinforcing. The outhouse before the autumn rains made the job miserable. The sound of splintering wood interrupted her morning ritual. "Mom!" Levi's voice carried a note of excitement rather than alarm. "You need to see this." She found him in the back room, kneeling beside what had been solid floorboard the night before. A section of planking near the far wall had given way under his weight, revealing a gap in the subflooring below. The wood was rotted through, probably weakened by years of moisture seeping in through the roof leaks they'd been steadily repairing. "I was just looking out the window at that deer path we saw yesterday," Levi explained, "and the floor just broke." "But Mom, look what's down there." Mira peered into the gap, expecting to see dirt and maybe some unpleasant evidence of rodent habitation. Instead, her flashlight beam illuminated something that definitely didn't belong under a cabin floor. Wrapped bundles, carefully sealed in what looked like oiled cloth, lay in a purposefully constructed hiding place. "We shouldn't touch anything," she said immediately, her teacher instincts kicking in. "This might be important. Historical artifacts, maybe. Or treasure," Levi added hopefully, "or someone's personal belongings that we have no right to disturb." But even as she said it, Mira felt curiosity warring with caution. The bundles were clearly placed there intentionally, in a space specifically designed for concealment. The wood around the opening showed signs of having been cut and fitted, not randomly broken. "But it's our cabin now," Levi pointed out with 12-year-old logic. "If someone left stuff here and they're not coming back for it, doesn't that make it ours?" That's not exactly how property law works. Though she had to admit she wasn't entirely sure how property law worked in cases like this. "Let me think about this." She sat back on her heels, studying the hidden space. The craftsmanship was consistent with the rest of the cabin's construction, careful, deliberate work by someone who knew what they were doing. The bundles themselves appeared to be wrapped in the same type of heavy cloth used for protecting documents or maps from moisture. "What if it's something important?" Levi pressed. "What if whoever hid it needed someone to find it? Or what if it's something that was hidden for a good reason, and we're better off leaving it alone?" But even as she voiced the sensible, cautious response, Mira found herself leaning closer to the opening. The bundles called to something deep in her curiosity, the same part of her that had loved solving chemistry problems, that had thrived on research and discovery back when she had a laboratory and students who cared about learning. "One look," Levi suggested, "just to see what it is. If it's something dangerous or illegal, we can put it back. And if it's something valuable that we're supposed to report to authorities, then we report it. But we won't know until we look." Mira realized she was rationalizing, finding reasons to do what she wanted to do anyway. The practical, responsible part of her mind whispered warnings about legal complications and unknown consequences. But the larger part, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and problems that needed solving, was already reaching for the nearest bundle. The oiled cloth was surprisingly well preserved, flexible enough to unwrap without tearing. Inside she found papers, not just any papers, but documents that looked official and important. Maps drawn in careful detail, showing topographical features, and marked with symbols she didn't immediately recognize. Letters written in fading ink on heavy paper. And underneath it all, what appeared to be official certificates or deeds of some kind. "What is all this?" Levi breathed, leaning close enough that his hair tickled her cheek. "I'm not sure." Mira lifted one of the maps, studying the careful lines and notations. "These look like survey maps, maybe? See these elevation markers and boundary lines?" The detail work was extraordinary. Whoever had drawn these maps knew the local geography intimately. marking not just major features, but subtle variations in terrain, water sources, and what appeared to be mineral deposits. Several locations were marked with small symbols that could have been anything from camping spots to cache locations. Look at this one. Levi pointed to a larger document that appeared to be some sort of official certificate. The paper was thick, with elaborate borders and formal language that spoke of legal weight and government authorization. Notice of mining claim, Mira read aloud. Filed in the name of Samuel Reeves, dated June 15, 1967. She looked up at Levi. S.R. Samuel Reeves. Those were his initials we found carved in the windowsill. So this was his cabin. And these are his maps and papers. But why hide them under the floorboards? Mira continued examining the documents. There were more mining claims, all in Samuel Reeves' name, all dated from the late 1960s. The locations marked on the maps corresponded to coordinates listed on the official papers. Maybe he was protecting them, Levi suggested. Like keeping them safe from fire or thieves or something. Or maybe he was hiding them for a different reason. The more Mira looked at the papers, the more questions arose. These mining claims, they look official, but I don't know if they were ever filed properly. And some of these maps show areas that extend well beyond our property. She found herself thinking like a teacher again, approaching the mystery as a research problem that needed systematic investigation. What did they know? Samuel Reeves had owned this cabin in the 1960s. He'd hidden important documents related to mining claims. He'd taken enough care with the hiding place to ensure the documents survived for decades. What didn't they know? Why he'd hidden them? Whether the claims were legitimate? What had happened to Samuel Reeves himself? There's more stuff down there, Levi observed, pointing into the hiding space. Want me to get the rest? Mira hesitated. Once they removed everything, there would be no pretending they hadn't seen it. Whatever responsibilities or complications these documents might bring, they would become part of their lives. Mom. Levi's voice was gentle but persistent. We can't just ignore it now that we know it's there. What if it's something that could help us? What if Samuel Reeves left it here hoping someone like us would find it? Someone like us? Someone who needed help. Someone who was starting over. The idea struck Mira as both romantic and possibly naive, but she couldn't entirely dismiss it. The careful preservation of the documents suggested someone who intended them to be found eventually, and the hiding place was positioned where anyone living in the cabin would eventually discover it, either through repairs like theirs or simple curiosity about the room's unusual construction. All right, she decided. But we do this carefully. Document everything. Take pictures with my phone before we move anything. And we research before we act. Research what? Everything. Mining law, property rights, what happened to Samuel Reeves. If these documents are legitimate, they might be worth something. If they're not, we need to understand what we're dealing with before we get in over our heads. They spent the next hour carefully removing and cataloging everything from the hidden space. More maps, showing increasingly detailed views of the local mountain ranges. Personal papers including what appeared to be correspondence with mining companies and government agencies. A small notebook filled with handwritten observations about geological formations and mineral samples. And at the very bottom, wrapped in an extra layer of oiled cloth, a leather pouch that clinked softly when moved. Gold, Levi whispered hopefully. Mira opened the pouch carefully, revealing not gold, but something potentially more valuable. Dozens of small rock samples, each labeled with coordinates and dates. The writing matched the handwriting in the notebook, and several of the samples showed the distinctive metallic gleam that suggested valuable mineral content. Silver ore, she realized. Her chemistry background helping her identify the characteristic appearance of silver-bearing rock. These are silver samples, and if they're labeled accurately, they show exactly where they came from. She looked at Levi, seeing her own excitement reflected in his wide eyes. I think Samuel Reeves found silver deposits in these mountains, and I think he documented everything so carefully that someone could follow his work and possibly file legal claims to whatever he found. Someone like us? Maybe, if the claims were never properly filed, if the land rights are available, if we can figure out the legal requirements. Mira sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. This could change everything for us, Levi, but it could also complicate everything. How? Well, for starters, we'd need to prove we have the legal right to pursue these claims. Then we'd need to understand modern mining law, environmental regulations, all sorts of things I know nothing about. And if these deposits are as valuable as they might be, we wouldn't be the only ones interested in them. Levi was quiet for a moment, processing the enormity of what they'd discovered. So what do we do? Mira looked at the documents spread across the floor, then at her son's hopeful face, then out the window at the mountains that might hold the key to their financial security. We learn everything we can. And then we decide if we're brave enough to follow where Samuel Reeves' work might lead us. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the maps and papers that had transformed their simple survival story into something much more complex. For better or worse, their mountain refuge had just revealed its deepest secret. The hand-drawn survey maps spread across their makeshift table told a story that grew more intriguing with each careful examination. Mira had spent the morning organizing Samuel Reeves's documents by date and type, creating a systematic approach to understanding what they'd discovered. Her teaching background served her well. She knew how to break down complex information into manageable pieces. Look at this, she said, pointing to a series of elevation marks on the most detailed map. These aren't just random drawings. This is professional-level surveying work. See how he's marked water sources, geological formations, even seasonal variations in stream flow. Levi traced the carefully drawn lines with his finger. He must have spent years up here, learning every inch of these mountains. The maps revealed a landscape far more complex than what Mira had understood from their few weeks of mountain living. Samuel had documented mining sites, both active and abandoned, throughout a region that extended well beyond their property boundaries. More significantly, he'd marked several locations with symbols that appeared to indicate significant mineral deposits. The level of detail suggests he knew exactly what he was looking for, Mira continued, cross-referencing the maps with the notebook they'd found. And these coordinates match up with observations in his journal about promising geological formations. She'd driven into town the previous day, using the library's internet access to research basic mining law and property rights. What she'd learned was both encouraging and daunting. In Montana, mineral rights could be claimed separately from land ownership, but the process required specific procedures and documentation. More importantly, unclaimed mineral deposits reverted to public domain after a certain period if the original claims weren't properly maintained. So if Samuel's claims were never filed, or if they expired, the mining rights might still be available. Levi asked, following her reasoning with the quick intelligence that reminded her why homeschooling him wouldn't be a hardship. Possibly. But it's complicated. Mira pulled out her notebook, where she'd copied key information from her library research. Modern mining claims require environmental impact assessments, proper surveys, fees, and ongoing maintenance. It's not like the old days when you could just stake a claim and start digging. But if the silver is really there, wouldn't it be worth going through all that process? That was the question that had kept Mira awake the past 2 nights. The rock samples they'd found showed clear evidence of silver content. If Samuel's documentation was accurate, the deposits he'd discovered might be substantial enough to support legitimate mining operations. In an era where silver prices had risen dramatically since the 1960s, even a small claim could represent significant value. I called a mining lawyer in Helena yesterday, she admitted, just to ask general questions about the claim process. Levi's eyebrows shot up. What did you find out? That it's definitely possible to file new claims on previously unclaimed deposits, but it requires extensive documentation, proper surveys, and fees we can't currently afford. The good news is that if Samuel's work is as thorough as it appears, we might have most of the documentation already done. She pulled out a photocopy of one of Samuel's mining certificates. The bad news is that this particular claim was never officially filed. See this stamp? It says draft, not submitted. He prepared all the paperwork, but apparently never followed through with the formal filing process. Why not? That's what we need to figure out. Maybe he got discouraged by the bureaucracy. Maybe he ran into financial problems. Or maybe he discovered something that made him change his mind about pursuing the claims. They spent the afternoon comparing Samuel's maps with modern topographical surveys from the library. The correspondence was remarkable. Samuel's hand-drawn features matched official government maps with an accuracy that confirmed his surveying skills. More importantly, several of the sites he'd marked as promising mineral deposits fell within areas that current geological surveys identified as likely to contain silver and other valuable minerals. Look at this site. Mira pointed to a location about 15 miles west of their cabin. Samuel's notes indicate significant silver ore samples. And according to this geological survey from 2018, the same area is identified as having high potential for precious metal deposits. So, other people know about it too? Geologists know the general area has potential, but Samuel's documentation is much more specific. He's identified exact locations, taken samples, and documented the most promising sites with coordinates accurate to within a few feet. Levi studied the maps with growing excitement. It's like he left us a treasure map. More like a research project that could lead to treasure, Mira corrected, but she felt the same excitement building. The question is whether we have the resources and knowledge to pursue it properly. That evening, they sat by the fireplace planning their next steps. Mira had compiled a list of questions that needed answering before they could make informed decisions about the mining claims. Who currently owned the mineral rights to the areas Samuel had documented? What would be required to file new claims? How much would the process cost and how long would it take? There's something else, Mira said, pulling out the last bundle of papers they'd examined. Samuel kept correspondence with various mining companies and government agencies. Some of these letters suggest he was in contact with people who might have been interested in his discoveries. What kind of people? Mining engineers, assay offices, even some correspondence with larger mining corporations. She showed Levi a letter dated 1968. This one is from a company called Western Silver Industries. They were apparently interested in purchasing information about potential mining sites in this region. Did he sell it to them? I don't think so. There's a draft response letter where Samuel declines their offer. But the interesting part is why he turned them down. Mira read from Samuel's handwritten draft. While I appreciate your interest in my geological research, I believe the mineral wealth of this region should benefit local communities rather than distant corporations. So he was trying to protect the land. Or maybe he just didn't trust big companies. Either way, it suggests he found something valuable enough that others wanted to buy information about it. They agreed that their next step would be a reconnaissance trip to some of the sites Samuel had marked as most promising. If the mineral deposits were real and accessible, they needed to see them firsthand before making any commitments to legal proceedings that could stretch their limited resources. We'll start with the closest site, Mira decided, studying the map. It's about a 3-mile hike from here, according to Samuel's measurements. We can make it a day trip and see what we find. And if we find silver ore, then we take samples, document everything carefully, and start researching how to file proper claims. But Levi, we have to understand that this could turn out to be nothing. These maps are 50 years old. The mineral deposits might have been mined out by someone else, or they might not be as valuable as Samuel thought, but they might be exactly as valuable as he thought. Yes, Mira agreed. They might be. She closed the maps and secured them in the oiled cloth wrapping. Tomorrow would bring their first real test of Samuel Reeves's legacy. If his documentation proved accurate, they might be holding the key to a future neither of them had dared imagine. If not, they would at least have spent a day hiking in beautiful country, learning more about the land that had become their sanctuary. Either way, The discovery had already changed something fundamental about their situation. They were no longer just survivors, making do with whatever they could find. They were partners in an investigation that might reveal genuine opportunity hidden in the mountains around them. As Levi settled into his sleeping bag that night, he asked the question that had been hovering over their conversations all day. "Mom, what would we do with the money if Samuel's maps lead to real silver deposits?" Mira considered the question seriously. "First, we'd make sure we could stay here permanently. Buy the land properly, winterize the cabin, set up reliable power and water systems. Then we'd think about your education, not just homeschooling, but resources for whatever you want to study or pursue. And then we'd figure out how to use whatever we found responsibly." Samuel seemed to believe that mineral wealth should benefit communities. Maybe we'd find ways to honor that philosophy. "That sounds like a good plan," Levi said sleepily. "It's a plan worth working toward," Mira agreed. But as she lay awake listening to mountain silence, she thought about all the unknowns that lay between their current situation and any imagined future prosperity. The maps in their possession might represent genuine opportunity, but pursuing that opportunity would require courage, resources, and knowledge they were only beginning to acquire. The wax-sealed journals had preserved Samuel Reeves' personal thoughts with remarkable clarity, and reading them felt like sitting across from a campfire, listening to stories from a lifetime of mountain solitude. Mira found herself drawn into the daily observations of a man who had clearly loved this landscape with the kind of deep knowledge that came from years of careful attention. June 20th, 1967. She read aloud to Levi as they shared morning coffee on the front steps. "Found another promising outcropping along Willow Creek. The quartz formation shows heavy mineralization, and the samples I collected yesterday confirm significant silver content. More importantly, the vein appears to extend much deeper than previous sites. This could be the discovery I've been working toward." Levi looked up from the map he'd been studying. "He writes like he's talking to someone." "Lonely people often do that," Mira observed. "Writing becomes a way of having conversation when there's no one around to talk to." The journals revealed a Samuel Reeves who was both methodical scientist and thoughtful philosopher. His entries moved seamlessly from detailed geological observations to reflections on the isolation of mountain life, the changing seasons, and his complex relationship with the mining companies that had begun showing interest in his work. "Listen to this one from September," Mira continued. "The aspen are turning early this year, painting the mountainsides in gold that rivals anything I might pull from the ground. I find myself wondering if the real treasure isn't what I see every morning when I step outside the cabin. The silver will be gone someday, mined out and shipped to distant cities. But these mountains will outlast us all." "He sounds like he actually understood what was important," Levi said. "He did. But he also understood that silver deposits could provide security and opportunities that mountain beauty couldn't." Mira turned to an entry from October of the same year. "Western Silver sent another representative today. Their offer has increased substantially. They're now proposing to purchase not just my survey data, but exclusive rights to file claims throughout the region. The money would set me up for life, but something about their approach troubles me. They seem less interested in responsible mining than in controlling access to the entire mountain range." The entries painted a picture of a man caught between practical necessity and principled concerns about corporate exploitation of natural resources. Samuel had clearly found substantial silver deposits, but he'd grown increasingly wary of the business interests trying to capitalize on his discoveries. "Here's where it gets really interesting," Mira said, finding the journal entry she'd bookmarked the night before. "November 15th, 1967, made a decision today that might be the most important of my life. Instead of selling out to Western Silver, I'm going to document everything myself and preserve the information for someone who might use it more responsibly. If I can't trust the corporations, maybe I can trust the future to bring better options." So he decided to hide everything and wait for people like us to find it. "It looks that way. But there's more. Mira flipped through several pages to an entry from the following spring. The hiding place is finished. All my surveys, sample locations, and claim preparations are secured where they'll survive fire, flood, or corporate theft. I've left enough clues that someone living in the cabin will eventually find them, but not so obvious that casual visitors will stumble across them. Whoever finds my work will have to be committed enough to really explore this place. Levi grinned. Like fixing a rotten floorboard? Exactly like fixing a rotten floorboard. Samuel planned this discovery. They spent the morning reading through more journal entries, building a picture of Samuel's life and work that felt increasingly personal. His observations about wildlife, weather patterns, and seasonal changes helped them understand their own mountain environment better. His struggles with isolation and self-doubt resonated with Mira's experience of starting over in an unfamiliar place. But most importantly, his detailed documentation of mining sites gave them confidence that his claims about silver deposits weren't wishful thinking or amateur enthusiasm. Samuel had approached mineral exploration with the same methodical care he'd applied to everything else in his solitary life. "Look at these assay reports," Mira said, showing Levi a series of official documents tucked between journal pages. He had rock samples professionally analyzed by 3 different laboratories. The silver content is consistently high across multiple sites. What does that mean in terms of actual value? Mira pulled out her phone and showed him the notes she'd made during her library research. Silver was selling for around $2 per ounce in 1967. Today, it's over $25 per ounce. So even a modest deposit would be worth more than 10 times what Samuel calculated. The implications were staggering. If Samuel's most promising site contained even a fraction of what his samples suggested, they might be looking at mineral rights worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Possibly more, depending on the extent and accessibility of the deposits. "There's something else," Mira continued, turning to one of Samuel's final journal entries. "I've been thinking about legacy lately, what we leave behind and for whom. The silver in these mountains could make someone wealthy, but wealth without wisdom is just another form of poverty. Whoever follows my work will face the same choices I've faced. Exploit the land for quick profit, or find ways to extract value while preserving what makes this place special." He was thinking about environmental stuff before most. People cared about environmental stuff. Samuel was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. Mira closed the journal and looked out at the mountains that had shaped both Samuel's life and their own refuge. He understood that mineral wealth comes with responsibilities. That afternoon, they made their first reconnaissance trip to the mining site Samuel had marked as most promising. The 3-mile hike followed game trails and natural contours that matched his hand-drawn maps perfectly. Every landmark he documented, distinctive rock formations, stream crossings, unusual tree configurations, appeared exactly where his surveys indicated. The site itself took Mira's breath away. A natural outcropping of quartz and granite showed the telltale signs of mineral deposits that her chemistry background helped her recognize. More importantly, Samuel's sample locations were still marked with small stone cairns that had survived 50 years of weather and wildlife. "This is it," she said, comparing the landscape to Samuel's detailed drawings. This is exactly what he described. Levi collected rock samples from the locations Samuel had marked, following the collection procedures described in his journals. The samples showed the same metallic gleaming and crystal formations that characterized the specimens they'd found in the leather pouch. "So he was right," Levi said, holding up a piece of ore that clearly contained silver deposits. "The silver is really here, it appears to be." Mira felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as the reality of their discovery settled in. But finding the silver and being able to claim it legally are 2 very different things. They spent another hour at the site, photographing everything and taking careful GPS coordinates with her phone. Samuel's documentation was proving remarkably accurate. Even his estimates of deposit depth and mineral concentration seemed to match what they could observe from surface evidence. On the hike back to the cabin, Levi asked the question that had been building all day. So what happens next? Next, we get serious about understanding the legal requirements for filing mining claims. And we figure out whether we have the resources to pursue this properly. What kind of resources? Money, mainly. Filing fees, survey costs, legal consultation, environmental assessments. Even if Samuel's work gives us a huge head start, there are still official procedures we have to follow. That evening, they sat by the fireplace with all of Samuel's documentation spread before them, planning their next moves. The journals had given them insight into his thinking and motivations. The maps and surveys provided detailed technical information about mining sites. The assay reports confirmed that substantial silver deposits existed. The question isn't whether Samuel found something valuable, Mira said, summarizing their situation. The question is whether we can afford to pursue it, and whether we want to take on all the complications that come with mining claims. What kind of complications? Legal challenges from other potential claimants. Environmental regulations. Dealing with mining companies who might want to buy us out or challenge our rights. And probably a lot of bureaucracy we haven't even thought of yet. Levi was quiet for a moment, processing the magnitude of what they were considering. But if we don't try, we'll never know what might have been possible. That's true. And if we do try and succeed, it could change everything about our future. And if we try and fail, then we'll still have this cabin, these mountains, and each other. We'll just be a little poorer and a lot wiser. Mira looked at her son's serious face in the firelight and realized that he was ready for this adventure in a way that surprised her. The past months of rebuilding their lives had taught him that taking calculated risks was sometimes necessary for survival and growth. All right, she decided. We'll move forward carefully, research everything thoroughly, take it one step at a time. And if we reach a point where the risks seem greater than the potential rewards, we'll reevaluate. Starting with what? Starting with a trip to the county courthouse to research current mineral rights ownership for the areas Samuel documented. If someone else already holds legitimate claims to these sites, we'll know we need to look elsewhere. And if the mineral rights are still available, then we start learning how to file proper mining claims in the 21st century. As they secured Samuel's papers for the night, Mira felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. They were no longer just caretakers of an abandoned cabin. They had become inheritors of Samuel Reeve's unfinished work, carriers of knowledge that could transform their lives or lead them into complications they weren't prepared to handle. But for the first time since her divorce had stripped away every certainty in her life, Mira felt like she was moving towards something positive rather than just running away from something painful. Whether Samuel's legacy led to wealth or wisdom or simply a deeper understanding of the mountains that had sheltered them, it represented hope for a future they could actively build rather than merely endure. The unclaimed mining certificates lay spread across their kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle that might solve all their problems or create entirely new ones. Mira had spent the morning at the county courthouse, researching current mineral rights ownership for the sites Samuel had documented, and the news was both encouraging and overwhelming. So none of the areas Samuel marked are currently under active mining claims. Levi asked, studying the photocopied records she'd brought back from town. That's correct. But that doesn't automatically mean we can claim them. Mira pulled out her notebook, filled with information gathered from 3 different government offices. Modern mining law is incredibly complex. We'd need to file what's called a load claim for each site, which requires specific surveys, environmental assessments, and ongoing fees to maintain the claims. How much money are we talking about? The initial filing fees alone would be about $1,500 per claim. Then there are survey costs, which could run several thousand more for proper documentation. And that's assuming we do most of the work ourselves. The numbers were daunting for a family living on the edge of financial survival. But Mira had learned something else during her courthouse research that changed the equation significantly. The lawyer she'd consulted, a sharp woman named Patricia Morrison, who specialized in mining law, had been fascinated by Samuel's documentation, she said. Samuel's surveys and assay reports could save us tens of thousands of dollars in preliminary work, Mira explained. If we can prove his documentation meets current legal standards, we might be able to use it to support our own claims. So Samuel's work is worth money even if we never mine anything? Potentially. But there's a catch. Mira flipped to a page of notes marked with several question marks. We have to prove that Samuel's claims were never properly filed, and that the mineral rights have remained unclaimed all these years. If there's any ambiguity about prior ownership, we could end up in expensive legal battles. They'd also learned that current silver prices made Samuel's discoveries potentially worth far more than he'd calculated in the 1960s. Patricia Morrison had run rough estimates based on Samuel's assay reports and current market values. Even the smallest site he'd documented could represent mineral rights worth several $100,000. The question isn't whether it's worth pursuing, Mira said. The question is whether we can afford the upfront costs and legal risks. What did the lawyer suggest? That we start with one site, the most promising and best documented one, and file a single claim to test the process. If that goes smoothly, we could consider additional claims later. Levi studied Samuel's maps, identifying the site that appeared most frequently in his notes and showed the highest concentration of valuable minerals. This one near Willow Creek? That's what I was thinking too. Samuel's documentation is most complete for that site, and it's close enough that we could monitor any mining activity ourselves. The practical challenges of filing a mining claim had given Mira new appreciation for Samuel's decision to hide his work rather than pursue it through official channels. The bureaucracy was intimidating even for someone with her educational background. She could only imagine how overwhelming it must have seemed to a solitary mountain man in the 1960s. There's something else, she continued, pulling out a document Patricia Morrison had given her. Current mining law requires environmental protection plans and community impact assessments. We'd need to prove that any mining activity would meet modern environmental standards. What does that mean practically? It means we couldn't just start digging up mountainsides. Any legitimate mining operation would need to be carefully planned to minimize environmental damage and restore the land. Afterward, the environmental requirements aligned perfectly with Samuel's own concerns about responsible resource extraction. His journals had repeatedly emphasized the importance of preserving the landscape that had given him so much personal satisfaction. So we'd be doing what Samuel wanted, finding ways to extract value while protecting what makes this place special. Exactly. But it also means higher costs and more complex procedures. That afternoon, they drove to the site near Willow Creek to take GPS measurements and photographs that would support their mining claim application. The location was even more impressive. On their second visit, a natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside where mineral-rich water had deposited layers of quartz and silver ore over thousands of years. Look at this, Levi said, pointing to a section of exposed rock face that clearly showed metallic veins running through the stone. Samuel marked this exact spot on his map. Mira took careful photographs and GPS coordinates, building the documentation package they'd need for their claim filing. The more she learned about modern mining law, the more she appreciated Samuel's meticulous approach to surveys and record-keeping. He documented everything exactly the way current regulations would require, she observed, comparing Samuel's notes to the legal requirements Patricia Morrison had outlined. It's almost like he knew what future mining law would demand, or like he just cared enough to do things right. Even when no one was watching, they spent several hours at the site, collecting additional rock samples and taking measurements that would verify Samuel's calculations. Every test confirmed that his assessments had been accurate. The silver deposits were real, substantial, and accessible enough to support legitimate mining operations. On the drive back to their cabin, Mira found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they were considering. Filing mining claims would mean stepping out of the anonymity and simplicity that had made their mountain refuge so healing. They'd be dealing with government agencies, legal procedures, and potentially significant public attention. Are you sure you're ready for all the complications this might bring? She asked Levi. Are you sure you're ready to pass up the opportunity? It was a fair question. For months, Mira had focused on basic survival, finding shelter, stretching their limited money, creating stability for Levi after the upheaval of divorce and financial ruin. The discovery of Samuel's work offered possibilities she'd never dared imagine. I keep thinking about what our life could look like if we had real financial security, she admitted. You could go to college anywhere you wanted. We could travel, pursue interests, maybe even help other families who find themselves starting over the way we did. And we could stay here, in the place that's become home. That evening, they sat by the fireplace with Samuel's mining certificates, making the decision that would determine their future. The paperwork was complex, the risks were real, and the costs would stretch their resources to the breaking point. But the potential rewards, both financial and personal, seemed worth the gamble. All right, Mira said finally. We'll file a claim on the Willow Creek site. We'll use Samuel's documentation as our foundation and see if we can make this work. One step at a time. And if we succeed, we'll honor Samuel's wishes about responsible development and community benefit, as she secured the mining certificates in their protective wrapping. Mira felt the weight of transformation settling over their lives. They were no longer refugees seeking shelter from financial disaster. They had become prospectors, following in Samuel Reeves's footsteps toward a future that could secure their independence, while honoring the mountains that had sheltered them both. Samuel's final letter lay unfolded on the kitchen table, its carefully penned words revealing a depth of loneliness and regret that made Mira's chest tight with recognition. The letter was addressed to "My dear brother Thomas," but had never been sealed, never sent. Preserved instead with all the other documents Samuel had chosen to hide rather than share with the world. December 3rd, 1968, she read aloud to Levi. I know it's been 5 years since we last spoke, and I know you think I'm a fool for choosing this isolation over the life we planned together in Denver. Maybe you're right. But I've found something here in these mountains that I never found in all our business ventures and family obligations. Peace with my own choices. Levi looked up from his homework. Homeschool mathematics that had become much more interesting since they'd started incorporating Samuel's surveying calculations into the lessons. He had a brother, apparently, and it sounds like there was some kind of family conflict that led to Samuel coming up here alone. Mira continued reading. You always said I was running away from responsibility, from the family mining business, from the chance to build something lasting together. I want you to understand that I wasn't running away from responsibility. I was running toward a different kind of responsibility. Responsibility to this land, to these mountains that have taught me more about wealth than all our corporate meetings ever did. The letter painted a picture of Samuel that was both more complex and more human than the methodical scientist they'd come to know through his journals and surveys. Here was a man who'd walked away from family expectations and financial security to pursue something he couldn't quite articulate, but knew was essential to his happiness. The silver deposits I've documented here could make our family fortune, Samuel had written. Conservative estimates suggest mineral rights worth more than everything Father left us combined. But I've come to understand that knowing where the silver lies and knowing what to do with that knowledge are different kinds of wisdom entirely. Mira paused, feeling the weight of parallel choices in her own life. Like Samuel, she'd reached a point where traditional paths, marriage, conventional career, suburban security, had failed to provide what she needed. The mountains had offered refuge, but Samuel's hidden legacy was offering something more challenging, the possibility of real prosperity coupled with genuine responsibility. Listen to this part, she continued. I could file these claims tomorrow and become wealthy within a year. Mining companies have offered substantial sums just for my survey data. But wealth without purpose is just another form of poverty. And I've seen what happens when corporate interests exploit natural resources without consideration for long-term consequences. So that's why he never filed the claims, Levi observed. He wasn't sure how to do it responsibly. It sounds like he was waiting to find the right approach or the right people to trust with the information. Mira turned to the letter's final page. He writes here about hoping that someone would eventually find his work who would understand both its value and its responsibilities. The letter's conclusion was both heartbreaking and hopeful. If you're reading this, Thomas, it means I never found the courage to send it, and probably never found the courage to return to the family and face all the questions about my choices. But I hope whoever eventually discovers my work will understand what I was trying to preserve here. Not just mineral wealth, but a way of life that respects the land that provides it. He never sent it because he was afraid, Levi said quietly. He was afraid of judgment, of having to defend choices that felt right to him, but seemed wrong to everyone else. Mira felt the familiar ache of understanding someone else's isolation too well. I think that's why he documented everything so carefully, but never followed through with filing claims. He wanted to preserve the opportunity without committing to a path he wasn't sure was right. That evening, they sat on the front steps, watching the sun set over the mountains Samuel had loved enough to choose over family connections and conventional success. The parallels between his story and their own were impossible to ignore. Both had come to these mountains seeking refuge from lives that hadn't worked out as planned. Do you think we're making the same mistake he made? Levi asked. Getting so caught up in the complications that we miss the opportunity. I think Samuel's mistake wasn't hesitation, it was isolation. He tried to figure everything out alone instead of finding people he could trust to help him make good decisions. And we're not alone. No, we're not. We have each other. And we're building relationships with people like Patricia Morrison, who can guide us through the legal complexities. Mira pulled out her phone, showing Levi the contact list she'd been building. We've got the lawyer, the county clerk who's been helping us understand mining regulations, even the librarian who's been tracking down historical records for us. So we're doing what Samuel couldn't do, building a community around the opportunity instead of trying to handle it all ourselves. The insight was more profound than Levi probably realized. Samuel's isolation had been both his strength and his limitation. It had given him the solitude necessary for detailed exploration and documentation. But it had also left him without the social support necessary to navigate complex legal and business decisions. That's exactly right. And I think that's what gives us the best chance of honoring both Samuel's work and his values. The next morning brought their first official step toward claiming Samuel's legacy. Mira had scheduled a meeting with Patricia Morrison to begin preparing their mining claim application for the Willow Creek site. The lawyer had reviewed Samuel's documentation and confirmed that it met current legal standards for supporting new claims. The key advantage you have, Patricia had explained during their phone conversation, is that Samuel's work eliminates most of the preliminary exploration costs. His surveys, assay reports, and site documentation would normally cost $20,000 to $30,000 to produce. Since you can prove the legitimacy of his work, you're starting the process several steps ahead of typical claimants. But legal advantages didn't eliminate financial challenges. The filing fees, environmental assessments, and ongoing maintenance costs would still stretch their limited resources. Mira had calculated that they could afford to pursue one claim if they used every dollar of their remaining savings and lived even more frugally than they already did. It's a bigger gamble than buying this cabin, she told Levi as they prepared for the trip to town. If the claim is successful, it could secure our future. If it fails, we'll be starting over again with even less than we had before. But if we don't try, we'll always wonder what might have been possible. And we'll never know if Samuel's faith in finding the right people to continue his work was justified. The drive to Helena gave them Time to review their application materials one final time. Samuel's meticulous documentation filled a folder thick enough to demonstrate the thoroughness of his exploration work. His maps, surveys, assay reports, and geological observations provided everything required to support a legitimate mining claim. More importantly, his personal writings, especially the unsent letter to his brother, had helped them understand the ethical framework that should guide their decisions. They weren't just pursuing wealth. They were accepting responsibility for stewarding resources that could benefit both their family and their community. "Whatever happens today," Mira said as they pulled into the law office parking lot, "we're honoring Samuel's memory by taking the chance he never took. And we're doing it the way he would have wanted, with careful preparation, honest intentions, and respect for the land that's giving us this opportunity." Patricia Morrison's office was filled with maps, mining regulations, and case files that spoke to the complexity of modern mineral law. But her warm reception and evident expertise made the intimidating process feel manageable. "Based on my review of Samuel's work," she began, "I believe you have an excellent foundation for a successful claim. The question isn't whether you can file a legitimate claim. It's whether you're prepared for everything that comes after filing." "What do you mean?" "Mining claims attract attention. Once your filing becomes public record, other interests may challenge your rights, attempt to buy you out, or compete for adjacent claims. You need to be prepared for your quiet mountain life to become considerably more complicated." Mira looked at Levi, seeing her own determination reflected in his steady gaze. They'd come too far and learned too much to turn back now. Samuel Reeves had spent decades preparing for someone to continue his work. They weren't going to disappoint him by choosing safety over opportunity. "We're ready," she said. "Let's file the claim." The hidden deed of trust emerged from behind a false panel in Samuel's desk, a desk Mira had been using for weeks, without realizing it contained the most significant secret of all. She'd been searching for additional documentation to support their mining claim when her pen rolled off the surface and disappeared into what should have been solid wood. "Levi, look at this." Her fingers traced the nearly invisible seam that revealed itself only when examined from the right angle. "There's another compartment here." The mechanism was ingenious, a sliding panel that required pressure in two specific spots simultaneously. Samuel had designed it to be discovered eventually by someone familiar with the desk's daily use, but not by casual searchers or intruders. Inside lay documents that made everything they'd discovered previously seem simple by comparison. "Deed of trust for the Consolidated Reeves Mining Holdings," Mira read aloud, her voice tight with growing comprehension. "Executed this day, June 1st, 1965, naming Samuel Thomas Reeves as sole heir and beneficiary of all mineral rights, land holdings, and business interests previously held by the Reeves Family Mining Consortium." Levi leaned closer, studying the elaborate legal language and official seals that marked the document as genuinely important. So Samuel wasn't just a prospector who found silver. He was already heir to a mining company? Not just any mining company. Mira continued reading, her understanding of Samuel's story transforming with each paragraph. According to this, the Reeves family controlled mineral rights throughout this entire region. Thousands of acres, multiple mining sites, and what appears to be a substantial family fortune. The implications were staggering. Samuel hadn't been hiding a few promising mining claims. He'd been concealing his inheritance of one of the largest mining operations in Montana. The sites he'd documented so carefully weren't new discoveries, but family holdings he'd inherited and then abandoned. But why would he walk away from all this? Levi asked, gesturing to documents that represented wealth beyond anything they'd imagined. Mira found the answer in a thick folder of correspondence attached to the deed. Letters from family members, business partners, and legal representatives painted a picture of bitter disputes over the direction of the family mining business. Samuel's father had died in 1964, leaving the consortium to his two sons, with the expectation that they would expand operations throughout the region. "Look at this," she said, pulling out a letter dated 6 months after the deed was executed. "Samuel, your continued absence from board meetings and refusal to sign expansion agreements is jeopardizing our entire operation. Thomas has filed papers requesting judicial review of your competency to serve as co-executor of father's estate. If you don't return to Denver immediately, you may forfeit your inheritance entirely." So his brother was trying to take control of the business. It looks like there was a power struggle between Samuel and Thomas over how to manage their inheritance. Samuel wanted to limit mining operations to minimize environmental damage. Thomas wanted to expand aggressively to maximize profits. More letters revealed the escalating conflict. Thomas had allied himself with larger mining corporations, planning to sell the family holdings to Western Silver Industries, the same company that had approached Samuel directly about purchasing his geological surveys. Samuel had opposed the sale, believing it would lead to destructive strip mining operations throughout the region. "Here's the crucial document," Mira said, finding a legal notice dated December 1968. "Final notice, Samuel Thomas Reeves. Your continued absence from required estate proceedings will result in forfeiture of inheritance rights. Legal presumption of abandonment will take effect January 1st, 1969, unless you appear before the probate court to contest this action." So he had a deadline to claim his inheritance, and he missed it, or chose to miss it. Mira found Samuel's handwritten response draft, never sent, that explained his decision. "I cannot in good conscience participate in the destruction of the land that has given our family its wealth. If claiming my inheritance requires approving mining operations that will devastate these mountains, then I choose to forfeit that inheritance and preserve my integrity." The full scope of Samuel's sacrifice was becoming clear. He hadn't simply walked away from family business disputes. He'd given up millions of dollars in mineral rights to prevent environmental destruction he couldn't support. But the legal implications for Mira and Levi were even more complex than Samuel's personal drama. If Samuel had been declared legally incompetent or had forfeited his inheritance, the mineral rights they were claiming might not have been his to document in the first place. "We need to call Patricia Morrison immediately," Mira said, gathering the deed and related documents. "This changes everything about our legal position." The drive to Helena was tense, with implications they were only beginning to understand. If Samuel's inheritance had been legally transferred to his brother Thomas, then all his geological work might represent surveys of land he had no right to claim. Their mining applications could be invalid from the start. Patricia Morrison's reaction to the deed was immediate and grave. "This is significant," she said, studying the legal language carefully. If Samuel forfeited his inheritance rights, then he technically had no authority to document claims on family mining properties. "So our application is worthless?" "Not necessarily, but we need to research what happened to the Reeves family mining holdings after Samuel's forfeiture. If Thomas sold them to Western Silver as planned, then those properties would be under corporate control. But if the inheritance was never properly settled, there might be legal ambiguities we can exploit." She pulled out her laptop and began searching public records. "Let's see what we can find about the resolution of the Reeves estate." What they found was both encouraging and disturbing. Thomas Reeves had indeed gained control of the family mining consortium after Samuel's forfeiture. But instead of selling to Western Silver, he died in a mining accident in 1970, just 2 years later. The family mining business had collapsed without proper succession planning, leaving thousands of acres of mineral rights in legal limbo. So neither brother lived to properly resolve the inheritance, Patricia summarized. The Reeves family mining holdings appear to have reverted to state control due to abandonment and unpaid taxes. Which means the mineral rights Samuel documented might actually be available for public claim, just as you originally believed. His forfeiture of inheritance rights doesn't invalidate his geological work. It just means he was surveying public land rather than family property. But there was another complication. Patricia's research revealed that Western Silver Industries had never given up their interest in the Reeves family holdings. The corporation had maintained legal claims to some of the mineral rights through complex partnership agreements with Thomas Reeves that predated his death. "This is where things get dangerous for you," Patricia warned. "Western Silver is now a subsidiary of a much larger mining conglomerate. If they discover that you're filing claims on properties they consider part of their development portfolio, they'll challenge your rights aggressively." "What kind of challenges?" "Legal harassment, bureaucratic obstacles, attempts to buy you out or intimidate you into withdrawing your claims. They have resources and legal teams that could make your life very difficult." Mira felt the weight of unintended consequences settling over their plans. What had seemed like a straightforward inheritance of Samuel's work was revealing itself as entry into conflicts that had been brewing for more than 50 years. "So what are our options?" "You can withdraw your mining claim application and avoid attracting corporate attention. You can proceed with filing and hope Western Silver doesn't notice or care about your small operation. Or you can prepare for a legal battle against opponents with virtually unlimited resources." Levi had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, but now he spoke up with the clarity that often surprised Mira. "What would Samuel want us to do?" It was the right question. Samuel had spent the last years of his mountain life documenting these mineral deposits precisely because he wanted someone to continue his work responsibly. He'd forfeited his inheritance rather than participate in environmental destruction, but he'd preserved the information necessary for future generations to make better choices. Samuel wanted the mineral wealth of this region to benefit local communities rather than distant corporations, Mira said, remembering his letter to Thomas. He documented everything so carefully because he believed the right people would eventually find it and use it properly. "Then we proceed," Patricia said. "But we do it with full knowledge of the risks, and we prepare for the possibility that claiming Samuel's legacy might require fighting for it against people who've been waiting decades for exactly this opportunity." As they drove back to their mountain cabin that evening, Mira realized that their quiet life of rebuilding and recovery was about to end. Filing the mining claim would make them players in a conflict much larger than anything they'd anticipated. But walking away would mean abandoning not just potential wealth, but the responsibility Samuel had entrusted to whoever found his work. "Are you ready for this to get complicated?" she asked Levi. "I think it's been complicated all along. We just didn't know it yet." The deed of trust lay on the seat between them. Proof that Samuel Reeves had been both more than they'd imagined and exactly what they'd hoped. A man who'd chosen principle over profit and preserved opportunity. For people brave enough to follow his example, Samuel's strategic map revealed itself to be far more than a simple layout of mining sites. It was a defensive plan designed by someone who understood that claiming valuable resources would inevitably attract dangerous attention. Mira found the map tucked inside the back cover of Samuel's final journal, drawn on heavy paper that had survived decades of careful storage. "Look at these markings," she said to Levi, spreading the map across their kitchen table. "These aren't just geological features. Samuel marked sight lines, defensive positions, escape routes, even places where someone could observe approaching vehicles without being seen." The level of tactical thinking was sophisticated, suggesting that Samuel had anticipated exactly the kind of corporate pressure they were now facing. He'd identified high ground overlooking the main access roads, marked locations where communications equipment could be hidden, and noted natural barriers that could slow or redirect unwanted visitors. He was planning for a siege, Levi observed, tracing the defensive perimeter Samuel had outlined around their property, more like planning for harassment and intimidation. Samuel knew that claiming these mineral rights would make enemies of people with more resources and fewer scruples than a mountain hermit could handle alone. The map also revealed modifications Samuel had made to the cabin itself. What Mira had taken for simple mountain construction were actually defensive improvements. Reinforced doors, windows positioned to provide clear fields of view, and even a hidden communications bunker built into the foundation. That's why the back room felt different, she realized. The floor is higher than the rest of the cabin because there's a space underneath. They spent the morning exploring the cabin with new understanding, finding evidence of Samuel's preparations everywhere they looked. The stone fireplace had been modified to include a hidden compartment for important documents. The water system included backup sources that would function even if the mainspring was compromised. Even the placement of furniture was strategic, providing cover and concealment if the cabin came under surveillance. Samuel was getting ready for the kind of fight we're about to face, Mira concluded. And he left us everything we need to win it. The timing was crucial. Patricia Morrison had called the night before with news that Western Silver's parent company, Consolidated Mining International, had noticed their claim filing and was preparing legal challenges. The corporate lawyers were already researching grounds to contest their mineral rights and had hired private investigators to gather information about Mira and Levi's background. They're not just challenging our legal right to file claims, Patricia had explained. They're looking for personal vulnerabilities they can exploit, financial problems, legal issues, anything they can use to pressure you into withdrawing. What kind of pressure? Harassment, bureaucratic obstacles, frivolous lawsuits designed to drain your resources. Corporate intimidation can be very effective against individuals who can't afford to fight back. But Patricia had also brought encouraging news. Her research into the Reeves Family Mining Consortium had revealed that Consolidated Mining's own claims to the disputed mineral rights were legally questionable. The company's rights were based on partnership, agreements with Thomas Reeves that might not have survived his death and the subsequent collapse of the family business. If we can prove that Consolidated Mining's claims are invalid, then your filing based on Samuel's work would take legal precedence, she'd explained. But proving that will require extensive legal research and possibly court challenges that could take years to resolve and cost more than we can afford, unless we can find allies who have their own reasons for opposing Consolidated Mining's expansion in this region. That afternoon, Mira and Levi drove to the local Grange Hall for a community meeting Patricia had arranged. Word had spread through the mountain communities about their mining claim and the corporate opposition it had attracted. The response had surprised everyone. Dozens of neighbors and local business owners who saw Consolidated Mining as a threat to their way of life. We've been watching that company buy up mineral rights throughout the valley, explained Jake Morrison, a rancher whose family had lived in the area for 3 generations. They're not interested in small-scale, responsible mining. They want to strip mine entire mountainsides and leave us with the environmental damage. Your claim might be the key to stopping them, added Sarah Chen, who ran the local environmental consulting business. If you can establish legitimate mining rights based on Samuel's work, it could block Consolidated Mining's expansion plans for this entire region. The community support was both heartening and intimidating. Mira realized they were no longer fighting just for their own financial security. They'd become symbolic of local resistance to corporate exploitation of natural resources. What kind of support can you offer? She asked. Legal expenses, Jake replied immediately. There are 12 families here who've pooled money to fight Consolidated Mining's expansion. Your legal battle is our legal battle. Local expertise, Sarah added. Environmental assessments, geological surveys, community impact studies, all the documentation you'll need to prove your mining plans meet current environmental standards. And political support, concluded Mayor Tom Bradley. The county commissioners are all opposed to large-scale corporate mining. They'll fast-track any legitimate claims that help preserve local control over mineral development. By the end of the meeting, Mira and Levi had gone from isolated individuals facing corporate intimidation to leaders of a community coalition with resources, expertise, and political connections. The transformation was dizzying, but it also felt like fulfilling Samuel's vision of mineral wealth benefiting local communities rather than distant corporations. Samuel would be proud. Levi said as they drove home through mountain darkness. He'd also be terrified, Mira replied. This is exactly the kind of attention and conflict he spent his life avoiding, but he prepared for it anyway, and he made sure we'd have what we need to handle it. That evening, they spread Samuel's strategic map across the floor and began planning their own defensive preparations. The community coalition provided resources and expertise, but the ultimate responsibility for protecting their claim and themselves remained with them. First priority is communications, Mira decided, following Samuel's annotated recommendations. We need reliable contact with Patricia and our allies, even if phone service is disrupted. Second priority is documentation, Levi added, understanding the strategic thinking. We need copies of all important papers stored in multiple secure locations. And third priority is making sure we're not isolated, if consolidated. Mining decides to escalate beyond legal harassment. They worked through the night, organizing their defenses, following Samuel's blueprint while adapting his plans to current technology and resources. His strategic thinking had anticipated threats they were only beginning to face. But his preparations provided frameworks they could build upon. The next morning brought their first test of Samuel's defensive planning. 2 vehicles with out-of-state plates had parked at the bottom of their access road, positioned to monitor anyone coming or going from the cabin. The occupants made no attempt to conceal their surveillance. Corporate intimidation often worked best when targets knew they were being watched. Time to see if Samuel's communication bunker actually works, Mira said, following his hand-drawn directions to a hidden entrance beneath the cabin's foundation. The space was small but sophisticated, containing radio equipment, backup power systems, and sight lines to the main road that allowed them to observe the surveillance team without being detected. More importantly, it provided secure communications that couldn't be intercepted or disrupted. Patricia, this is Mira, she said into the radio handset. We have corporate surveillance teams positioned on our access road. Time to activate our support network. The response was immediate. Within 2 hours, the surveillance vehicles found themselves surrounded by local residents who had come to welcome the out-of-state visitors with aggressive hospitality. The corporate investigators retreated, but the message had been delivered on both sides. Consolidated Mining was serious about stopping their claim, and the local community was equally serious about supporting it. Round 1 to us, Jake Morrison reported over the radio. But this is just the beginning. They'll be back with better tactics and more resources. We'll be ready, Mira replied, looking at Levi with a mixture of pride and apprehension. They'd moved beyond Samuel's careful isolation into open conflict with opponents who had virtually unlimited resources and decades of experience intimidating smaller challengers. But they also had Samuel's strategic planning, community support, and legitimate legal claims to the mineral rights he'd documented so carefully. Most importantly, they had each other and the determination to honor his legacy by fighting for responsible development of the wealth he'd preserved. The battle for Samuel's inheritance was about to begin in earnest, and they were as prepared as anyone could be for a conflict that would determine not just their own future, but the future of their entire mountain community. The original filing documents felt heavier than paper should as Mira carried them up the courthouse steps, knowing that submitting them would paint a permanent target on their backs. The manila envelope contained not just their mining claim application, but Samuel's complete documentation package, 50 years of careful geological work that could either secure their future or destroy their peace. Oh, forever, last chance to change our minds, she said to Levi as they paused outside the county clerk's office. Samuel spent decades preparing these documents. "We're not backing down now." Patricia Morrison was waiting for them in the hallway, flanked by 2 additional lawyers the community coalition had hired to support their filing. The corporate pressure had escalated beyond anything they'd anticipated. Consolidated Mining had filed preemptive challenges to their claim, hired investigators to dig into their personal history, and even attempted to pressure the county clerk into rejecting their application on technical grounds. "Are you ready for this?" Patricia asked. "Once we file these documents, everything becomes public record. Consolidated Mining will have full access to Samuel's work, and they'll use it to challenge us at every possible level. They'll also have to explain why they think they have better rights to claims based on expired partnerships with a dead man," added James Rodriguez, the environmental lawyer the coalition had retained. "Samuel's documentation is stronger than anything they can produce." The filing process itself was surprisingly mundane. A series of forms, fees and official stamps that transformed Samuel's hidden legacy into legal reality. But Mira could feel the weight of consequence in every signature, every notarized statement that committed them to a path they couldn't abandon without losing everything they'd worked to build. Mining Claim 2024-047, filed in the name of Mira Lane, guardian and representative of the estate of Samuel Thomas Reeves, the clerk announced, applying the final official seal. Public notice period begins immediately with a 30-day window for challenges or competing claims. 30 days for Consolidated Mining to throw everything they have at us, Patricia translated as they left the courthouse. The response was faster than anyone expected. Before they'd even returned to their cabin, Patricia's phone was ringing with calls from corporate lawyers, demanding immediate meetings to discuss resolution of competing claims. The tone was polite but threatening. Consolidated Mining wanted to negotiate before the situation escalated to open legal warfare. "What kind of negotiation?" Mira asked. "They'll offer to buy your claim for a fraction of its value, with the implicit threat that refusing their offer will result in expensive legal challenges you can't afford to fight. And if we refuse, then we find out how far they're willing to go to protect what they consider their territory." The answer came the next morning when Mira woke to find their access road blocked by county vehicles and officials, claiming they needed to conduct an emergency environmental assessment of their property. The timing was obviously coordinated. Consolidated Mining had used their political connections to trigger bureaucratic harassment designed to make their daily life unbearable. "This is harassment," Levi said, watching environmental inspectors swarm their property with equipment and paperwork. "This is corporate pressure," Patricia corrected, arriving with legal documents of her own. "But it's also an opportunity. Every bureaucratic action they take creates a paper trail we can use to prove coordinated intimidation." The environmental assessment revealed nothing problematic. Samuel's careful stewardship and their own minimal impact had left the land in pristine condition. But the process consumed 3 days and cost them hundreds of dollars in fees they could barely afford. More importantly, it demonstrated how easily corporate influence could weaponize government bureaucracy against individual property owners. "Round 2 to them," James Rodriguez admitted. "But now we have documentation of retaliatory harassment tied directly to your mining claim filing." The media attention was unexpected, but welcome. A reporter from the Helena Independent Record had picked up the story of a mother and son fighting corporate intimidation over mining rights inherited from a mountain hermit. The human interest angle, David versus Goliath in the modern American West, attracted attention throughout Montana and beyond. "Local woman fights. Mining giant for dead prospector's legacy," read the headline that made Mira simultaneously proud and terrified. The article brought both support and scrutiny. Environmental groups rallied to their cause, seeing their fight as symbolic of corporate overreach in rural communities. But it also attracted attention from other mining interests who wanted to understand how Samuel's documentation might affect their own operations. "We're becoming famous," Levi observed, reading comments on the newspaper's website. "Famous means visible, and visible means vulnerable," Mira replied. "But it also means we're not alone anymore." The community support had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. Dozens of local businesses had posted signs supporting their mining claim. A legal defense fund had raised enough money to cover their immediate expenses. Most importantly, other property owners throughout the region had begun researching their own mineral rights, inspired by the possibility that legitimate claims could block corporate expansion. "You've started something bigger than just your own mining claim," Mayor Bradley told them during a community meeting that filled the Grange Hall beyond capacity. "You've given people hope that they can fight back against corporate intimidation and win." But corporate intimidation was escalating in response to public attention. Private investigators had contacted Mira's former neighbors, her ex-husband, even Levi's old school, searching for anything that could be used to question their character or competence. The harassment was legal but personal, designed to make them feel isolated and overwhelmed. "They're trying to find ammunition for a custody challenge," Patricia warned. "If they can convince a court that your living situation is unsuitable for Levi, they can force you into legal battles that would drain your resources and distract from the mining claim." "Let them try," Mira said with more confidence than she felt. "Our mountain life has been better for Levi than anything suburban security ever provided. But can you prove that in court if necessary?" The question forced them to document aspects of their life they'd taken for granted. Levi's educational progress under homeschooling, their financial stability despite modest resources, the strong community connections they'd built since moving to the mountains. What had felt like simple survival was revealed to be evidence of successful adaptation and responsible parenting. "They can investigate all they want," Levi said with the fierce loyalty that made Mira's heart ache with pride. "We're not doing anything wrong, and we're not backing down." The 30-day public notice period was drawing to a close when Consolidated Mining filed their formal challenge to the mining claim. The document was 80 pages of legal arguments, claiming superior rights based on the expired partnership agreements with Thomas Reeves, environmental concerns about small-scale mining operations, and procedural objections to using Samuel's documentation to support new claims. "It's mostly legal posturing designed to intimidate us into settlement," Patricia explained. "But they've also made factual claims we can challenge if we're willing to take this to court." "What would a court battle cost?" "More than you can afford alone. But with the Legal Defense Fund and coalition support, it's manageable. The question is whether you're prepared for a fight that could take months or years to resolve." Mira looked at Levi, seeing Samuel's determination reflected in her son's steady gaze. They'd come too far and learned too much to surrender now. Samuel had preserved his work for exactly this moment, when people with courage and community support could claim what he'd been too isolated to pursue himself. "We're prepared," she said. "Samuel trusted us to finish what he started. We're not going to let him down." The formal response to Consolidated Mining's challenge would mark the beginning of open legal warfare. But it would also mark their transformation from desperate refugees seeking shelter to legitimate heirs of Samuel's legacy, fighting for principles that mattered more than personal comfort or financial security. "Then we go to court," Patricia said, "and we trust that 50 years of Samuel's work will prove stronger than 50 years of corporate legal maneuvering." As they prepared to leave the courthouse, a group of supporters had gathered on the steps, ranchers, small business owners, and environmental advocates who saw their fight as defending the entire community against corporate colonization. The sight of familiar faces offering encouragement reminded Mira that they were no longer fighting alone. "Whatever happens next," she told the crowd, "we're honored to represent everyone who believes that local communities should control their own natural resources." The battle lines were drawn. The documents were filed, and Samuel Reeves' 50-year-old dream of responsible mineral development was finally getting its day in court. Samuel's testament emerged from an old video, a camera Levi found while cleaning out the final hidden compartment in the cabin's foundation. The camera was ancient by digital standards, but it had been carefully sealed in waterproof containers that had preserved both the device and its contents through decades of mountain weather. "Mom, you need to see this," Levi called from the basement space they'd been systematically exploring since discovering Samuel's strategic planning documents. The camera's battery was long dead, but Mira's old laptop had the right connections to power the device and access its stored video files. What they found was Samuel himself, sitting in their kitchen, speaking directly to whoever would eventually discover his work. "If you're watching this, it means you found my documentation and decided to pursue the mining claims I was never brave enough to file myself." Samuel's voice carried across 50 years with remarkable clarity. "I hope you understand what you're getting into, because the people who want to control these mineral rights won't give up easily." The video was dated December 30th, 1968, just before the deadline for Samuel to appear in court and contest his forfeiture of inheritance rights. He looked older than Mira had imagined, with premature grey hair and lines around his eyes that spoke to years of mountain solitude and difficult decisions. "My name is Samuel Thomas Reeves, and I want to provide legal testimony supporting whoever has the courage to continue my work. The mineral deposits I've documented in these mountains represent millions of dollars in silver ore, but more importantly, they represent an opportunity to prove that natural resources can be developed responsibly instead of exploited destructively." Mira paused the video to call Patricia Morrison. "You need to get here immediately." Samuel left video testimony that could change everything about our legal position. While they waited for Patricia to make the drive from Helena, Mira and Levi watched the rest of Samuel's recorded message. He'd been thorough in his legal preparation, providing detailed testimony about his geological work, his family history, and his decision to forfeit inheritance rights rather than participate in environmentally destructive mining operations. "The claims I'm documenting are legitimate and legal." Samuel continued in the video. "I have surveying credentials from the Colorado School of Mines, and my geological assessments have been verified by 3 independent laboratories. More importantly, I've designed mining plans that would extract valuable minerals while preserving the landscape for future generations." The technical details Samuel provided were precisely what their court case needed. He'd anticipated every legal challenge Consolidated Mining might raise and prepared responses that demonstrated both his professional competence and his environmental responsibility. "But I want to be clear about why I'm preserving this information instead of filing claims myself," Samuel said, his voice growing more personal. "I've seen what happens when mining companies prioritize profit over community welfare. The damage they cause lasts for generations, long after the valuable minerals are extracted and shipped away. I'm trusting that whoever finds my work will understand that mineral wealth should serve local communities, not distant shareholders." Patricia's arrival interrupted their viewing, but her excitement was immediate when she understood what the video represented. "This is legal testimony from the original prospector supporting your mining claims. It establishes Samuel's competency, validates his geological work, and provides contemporary documentation of his intentions." More importantly, added James Rodriguez, who had driven up with Patricia, "it gives us Samuel's own statement about why he forfeited his inheritance rights. He chose to abandon corporate mining in favor of community-based development, exactly what you're proposing." The video testimony transformed their legal position from defensive to offensive. Instead of simply responding to Consolidated Mining's challenges, they could now present positive evidence that their claims represented the original prospector's intended legacy. "Samuel, this is what he wanted," Mira said, as they prepared to submit the video as evidence. He spent the last years of his life documenting these claims specifically so someone like us could pursue them responsibly. The court hearing 3 days later drew observers from throughout Montana and beyond. Environmental groups, mining industry representatives, legal scholars, and community activists packed the courtroom to witness what many saw as a defining case in the ongoing conflict between corporate resource extraction and community-controlled development. Judge Margaret Stone was known for careful attention to legal details and impatience with corporate intimidation tactics. Her preliminary questions suggested she understood the broader implications of the case beyond the specific mining claims at issue. Mr. Williams, she addressed Consolidated Mining's lead attorney, your client claims superior rights to mineral deposits based on partnership agreements with Thomas Reeves. Please explain how those agreements remained valid after Mr. Reeves' death in 1970 and the subsequent dissolution of the Family Mining Consortium. The corporate lawyer's response was technically competent but legally weak. Consolidated Mining's claims depended on a series of contract amendments and successor agreements that had never been properly executed or recorded. Your Honor, Patricia Morrison stood to present their case. We have video testimony from Samuel Reeves himself explaining why he forfeited his inheritance rights and what he intended for his geological work. His documented intention was to preserve these mineral deposits for community-based development rather than corporate exploitation. Samuel's video played on a large screen that dominated the courtroom. His voice carried an authority and authenticity that no amount of corporate legal maneuvering could counter. It was the actual prospector, speaking from personal knowledge about mineral deposits he'd spent decades documenting. The geological evidence is overwhelming, Samuel said in the recording. These silver deposits are real, substantial, and accessible. But they should be developed by people who understand that the land itself is more valuable than anything you can extract from it. Judge Stone's questions following the video focused on technical details about mining law and environmental requirements. But her tone suggested she was impressed by the thoroughness of Samuel's work and the legitimacy of Mira's claims to continue it. Ms. Lane, the judge addressed Mira directly, you understand that approving your mining claims will establish precedent for community-based mineral development throughout this region. Yes, Your Honor. That's exactly what Samuel intended and exactly what our community supports. And you're prepared to meet all environmental requirements and community impact standards. We've already prepared detailed environmental plans that exceed current legal requirements. Our goal is to prove that mineral extraction can enhance rather than damage local communities. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The court finds that Samuel Reeves' documentation provides legitimate foundation for new mining claims, that his video testimony establishes clear intention for community-based development, and that Consolidated Mining International has failed to prove superior rights to the disputed mineral deposits. Mining Claim 2024-047 is hereby approved and recorded. The courtroom erupted in cheers from community supporters while corporate lawyers huddled to plan their inevitable appeals. But Judge Stone's ruling had established legal precedent that would be difficult to overturn. Community claims based on legitimate geological work would receive equal consideration with corporate development proposals. We won, Levi said with amazement as they left the courthouse surrounded by celebrating supporters. Samuel won, Mira corrected. We just had the courage to finish what he started. The video testimony had provided more than legal vindication. It had given them Samuel's personal blessing for continuing his work. His final recorded words would stay with them forever. Take care of these mountains, and they'll take care of you. That's the only wealth that really matters. 6 months later, the new family photo sat on the mantelpiece of their restored cabin, showing Mira and Levi standing before a home that had been transformed from desperate refuge into permanent sanctuary. The roof was solid, The windows gleamed with proper glass, and the addition they'd built using mineral. Wright's income provided space for Levi's homeschool laboratory and Mira's home office for the consulting business she'd started helping other families navigate mining. Law. Hard to believe this is the same place, Levi said, looking at the photo as he worked on his chemistry homework at the kitchen table that had once held Samuel's hidden documents. Same place, different life, Mira agreed, reviewing applications from 3 mining companies that wanted to lease extraction rights from their claim while maintaining the environmental standards they'd established. The wealth hadn't come overnight or all at once. The initial mineral extraction had proceeded slowly and carefully, following environmental protocols that served as a model for responsible mining throughout the region. But even limited operations had generated enough income to secure their future, while proving that Samuel's vision of community-based development was both practical and profitable. More importantly, their legal victory had opened opportunities neither of them had anticipated. Mira's experience navigating mining law had led to consulting work with other property owners discovering their own mineral rights. Levi's mastery of geological surveying techniques had earned him early admission to the Colorado School of Mines, the same institution where Samuel had learned the skills that preserved their inheritance. Mrs. Chen called this morning about the environmental study results, Mira reported, referring to the independent assessment of their mining impact after 6 months of operations. Our extraction methods have actually improved water quality in Willow Creek and stabilized soil conditions throughout the watershed. Samuel would be proud. Samuel is proud. I can feel it every time I look out at these mountains. The community transformation had been equally dramatic. Their legal victory had inspired dozens of other families to research their own mineral rights, leading to the formation of a cooperative mining association that negotiated collectively with corporate interests. Property values had increased throughout the valley as residents gained control over natural resource development rather than leaving it to distant corporations. The lawyer from Denver is here, Levi announced, looking out the window at the approaching vehicle. Margaret Foster represented a consortium of environmental groups that wanted to establish their mining operation as a permanent model for sustainable resource extraction. The proposal would provide substantial additional income while ensuring that their methods could be replicated throughout the region. Ms. Lane, Margaret said as they settled around the kitchen table, our analysis confirms that your mining operation has achieved something unprecedented. Profitable mineral extraction that actually enhances environmental conditions while providing significant community economic benefits. That was always the goal, Mira replied. Samuel's documentation made it clear that he wanted to prove responsible mining was possible, which is why we'd like to propose a partnership that would expand your model throughout Montana and beyond. Our foundation would provide capital for additional claims, while your expertise would guide environmental standards and community engagement. Protocols. The offer was substantial. Enough money to secure Levi's education through graduate school, while funding environmental research that could influence mining law throughout the American West. But more than financial security, it represented validation of Samuel's 50-year-old dream that mineral wealth could serve community welfare rather than corporate profit. What would you need from us? Levi asked, demonstrating the mature judgment that had developed through their shared adventure. Your knowledge, your reputation, and your commitment to maintaining environmental standards even when it reduces short-term profits. You've proven that responsible mining is profitable mining. We want to help you prove it can be scalable mining as well. That evening, they hiked to Samuel's favorite overlook, a ridge that provided views across the entire valley where their legal victory was inspiring sustainable development throughout the region. Small-scale mining operations were providing jobs and income for local families while maintaining the landscape beauty that had originally attracted Samuel to his mountain refuge. Do you think we made the right choices? Mira asked as they watched the sunset over mountains that now held both their past and their future. "I think we made Samuel's choices," Levi replied. "He documented everything because he believed the right people would eventually find it and use it properly. And you think we're the right people?" "I think we became the right people by choosing to honor his legacy instead of just profiting from it." The photo in their cabin showed more than physical transformation. It captured the moment when desperate survival had evolved into purposeful prosperity. They'd bought their refuge for 50 cents and discovered it was worth millions. But the real treasure had been learning that wealth without wisdom was just another form of poverty. Samuel's journal lay open on the table beside them, his final entry providing guidance that had shaped every decision they'd made. "The mountains will outlast us all. Our responsibility is to take only what we need and leave the land better than we found it." As stars emerged over the valley they now helped protect and develop, Mira realized that Samuel's greatest gift hadn't been the mineral rights or the financial security they'd provided. His gift had been the example of choosing principle over profit, community welfare over individual gain, and long-term stewardship over short-term exploitation. "Ready to go home?" she asked Levi as the mountain air grew cold with approaching winter. "We are home," he replied, gesturing toward the lights scattered throughout the valley. Families and businesses thriving because one desperate mother had been brave enough to bet everything on nothing at all, and wise enough to honor the legacy that made their gamble pay off. The cabin that had sheltered their desperation had become the foundation for their prosperity. Samuel's hidden inheritance had secured their future while preserving the landscape that had given meaning to both their lives. And the 50-cent sanctuary that nobody else wanted had proven itself worth more than money could measure. It was home.